To another Sunday School Short. Today we're in Acts 24 through 26, walking through the New Testament chronologically as it happened, as it was written. Like, subscribe, and share. If this is a blessing to you, hit the bell notification for when new Devos come out. So in Acts 23, Paul had been arrested wrongly and for inciting a riot and such as that, and desecrating the temple and such as that, wrongly accused. So anyway, he was taken to Caesarea, as you can see on the map up there, which is a coastal town on the northern side of Israel. All right, beautiful area. Here we pick up 5 days later. He's there. Ananias, the high priest, the accusers had arrived there, the Jewish leaders along with lawyers. They presented their case against Paul. The lawyer flattered Governor Felix, saying he had provided a long period of peace for the Jews. He accused Paul of stirring up riots, of being the ringleader of a cult. He tried to desecrate the temple, and so on and so on. Verse 10, the governor motioned for Paul to speak at this point. Paul denies all these accusations. In 14, he says, "But I admit I am a follower of the way," meaning that he was a follower of Jesus. That was the term that was used of the day, which they call a cult. Verse 15, "I have the same hope in God that these men have here, he will raise both the righteous and the unrighteous." After years away, I'd come back to Jerusalem to give aid to the poor. I was going through a purification ceremony at the temple. There was no crowd. There was no riot. Felix was familiar with the way it says, and he adjourned, wanting to wait for the commander. The commander knew that Paul was being wrongly accused and whatnot. He allowed Paul his freedom to have visitors during his time there in Caesarea. A few days later, Felix and his wife called for Paul, and he listened to Paul as they told them about Jesus Christ. Paul got to the point where he started talking about self-control and the day of coming judgment, and that made Felix frightened. And again, don't neglect the reading here. Lots in here. I'm just hitting high points. Verse 25, Felix says, "Go away for now." Felix sent for Paul often, though, hoping that Paul would bribe him. This went on for 2 years until Felix was succeeded by Festus. Acts 25 says, 3 days after Festus took over, he went to Jerusalem. The Jewish leaders met with him and made accusations about Paul. 8 to 10 days later, Festus returned to Caesarea, and the next day he asked for Paul. The Jewish leaders in the court accused Paul. Paul denied all those accusations again. And in verse 8, "I am not guilty of any crime against Jewish laws, against the temple, or the Roman government." Festus says to Paul, "Are you willing to go to Jerusalem to stand trial?" Paul says, "Heck to the no," because he knew he'd be killed, so he appealed to Caesar. Festus agreed to that appeal. A guy named King Agrippa came. He was the ruler over northern and eastern Palestine. He arrived with his sister Beatrice to pay the respects to Festus, who was a new ruler. So that's oftentimes you either send gifts or you go make a visit. Festus told King Agrippa about Paul and his case, and in verse 19, it's something about religion. It was something about a dead man named Jesus who Paul insists is alive. Verse 20, "I was at a loss on how to investigate these things." In verse 22, King Agrippa says, "I'd like to hear the man myself." And Festus says, "You will tomorrow." So the very next day, Paul was brought before King Agrippa and Beatrice because Felix was needing help putting together these charges to send a letter, because he had already appealed. He had been approved for the appeal to Caesar, but he had to write a letter on what the actual charges were. So he wanted a backdrop of King Agrippa and Beatrice and others to, hey, what can I write down in this letter? So Acts 26, Paul addresses King Agrippa in a flattering way. He starts out his knowledge of Jewish customs, etc., stuff like that. Paul gives Agrippa and Beatrice his own resume, his Jewish resume. Hey, I was a Pharisee. Now I'm on trial because of my hope in the fulfillment of God's promise made to our ancestors. See, King Agrippa was a Jew. He knew Jewish customs and stuff like that. He talks about his life prior to Jesus. Again, his road to Damascus experience. See, Paul here is just giving his testimony. And your testimony is it's how God worked and how he is working in your life. And that can't be disputed. People can say, well, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe, but no one can dispute your testimony, what happened inside of you. He shared the gospel with King Agrippa. He said, that's why Jews are trying to kill me. The last part of 22 says, I teach nothing except for what the prophets and Moses said would happen. Festus says, are you crazy? And Paul says, I am not. Paul says, King Agrippa knows about these things. Then he asked King Agrippa for a response. So he had given the message. Now he's asking for a response. He had given the good news about the things of Jesus to King Agrippa. And oftentimes that's true in our life. We can call for a response. The Bible talks about planting and watering, those types of things. But it also talks about harvesting. Sometimes we get to be on the harvesting end of things, but you have to be bold enough to ask for a response. Like, what about you? Do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, that you yourself are sinful and you're in need of forgiveness? Jesus died on the cross. He took your place, the sin penalty. He died on the cross for you and for me. But death couldn't hold him. He rose from the dead, and he has eternal life, offers that to me and you. Do you believe that? And just asking somebody, hey, do you believe that? That is calling for a response, okay? And that's exactly what Paul did there that day. King Agrippa, do you believe in the prophets? I know you do, it says in verse 27 and 28. King Agrippa says, do you think you can persuade me to be a Christian so quickly? Paul says, I hope you and the audience become like me, except for these chains. And King Agrippa, like others in our lives, are so close, within an earshot of heaven, because they've heard the message, but they don't believe. It ends with Festus, King Agrippa, and Beatrice standing and leaving, saying, this man has done nothing wrong to deserve death or imprisonment. And in 32, King Agrippa says, he could have been set free had he not appealed to Caesar's. But it was God's will for him to go give the gospel message to Rome, and all the journeys that take place getting from Caesarea to Rome. And we'll see that in the days to come. God bless you. Like, subscribe, and share.